Returning to Katahdin, an Appalachian Trail dream. Have you ever dreamt of hiking the AT? Bruce Matson did, so we're going to follow him every step of the way. Thanks for coming back to Returning to Katahdin, an Appalachian Trail dream, sponsored by Trailtopia. We're already at episode number 3, and we're delighted at how many of you have crossed over and joined us from our other show, Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail. Please tell all your friends about it, the more the merrier. This week we'll be talking with Bruce about his trail name and the origins of Returning to Katahdin. We'll be discussing the theme behind the name, so there's plenty to chat about. But before we hear from Bruce, let's have a quick word about our lovely sponsor. When I was hiking, I'd wake up to my alarm, deflate my airpad and contemplate my blah breakfast. Every morning I poured water into those different coloured paper bags, scrunch around the ingredients, not one of which had any association with fruits, and then eat that soulless gunk. I then find unhydrated powder and sugar in the crevices of the bag. Trailtopia's blueberry oatmeal is a bit of a novelty because it actually has real blueberries. Who'da thunk? No gunk. It tastes great. The bag design ensures complete hydration and it really sets you up for the day. Try Trailtopia Adventure Food, the best of home cooking away from home. Now, just in case you're new to the show, this is what we're doing. We're following Bruce Matson, a 60-year-old guy who has dreamed for more than 40 years of hiking the Appalachian Trail. We're doing a deep dive into his motivations, his experiences and his preparation. We're even going to find out more about Bruce from his friends and family. Now, the difficult thing about this last bit is that everybody seems to agree what a great bloke he is. I haven't been able to find anybody to dish some dirt on him. Yet. He may turn out to be that rarest of humans, a man without flaws. Unlikely, because I've never met one yet, but we'll see. When he sets out in the last week of February 2018, we're going to be following him every step of the way. Well, not exactly every step, you know what I mean. I'll be getting updates from Bruce while he's on the trail and gauging his progress, at least 2, sometimes 3 times a week. This way, we'll have a sort of live-ish look at what it takes to hike the trail. Should be fun. I hope that you're going to stay with us all the way to the end. Oh, and by the way, a not insignificant part of this is that Bruce is trying to raise $250,000 for the Appalachian Trail Conservancy through his hike. That is a figure not to be sneezed at. So let's get on with the show and listen to our latest conversation. Here's Bruce. Okay, we're back on with Bruce. Hi, Bruce. How are you?
Hey, good morning. I'm great. Thanks.
Now, the theme of this particular episode is there a theme to Returning to Katahdin? And RTK is a particularly unusual name, and it means Returning to Katahdin. Can you explain the origins of it and why you chose to name yourself prior to the trail as opposed to getting somebody to give you a name that you might not like?
Sure. So let's start with the name. It's a little quicker answer. The theme is probably a fairly prolonged answer, but
Sure.
3 or 4 years ago when I really found I was going to have the opportunity to do this, I was very excited and I actually started roughing up a website and trying to think about what I would say and what it would look like. And I had done a little blogging when I did the Camino. And so I came upon this idea about returning to Katahdin, and I'll return to that in a minute.
Sure.
But the name came up as almost incidental issue. I was planning actually a hike in Tasmania. I had an opportunity to go to Australia, and I was really on fire with this passion to get back into backpacking and hiking. And I did a lot of research, and there's a fairly world-famous hike in Tasmania called the Overland Track. Uh-huh. If you Google the best 20 hikes in the world, this often comes up on those lists.
Wow.
So I got excited about trying to do that since I was on the other side of the world, and you don't get there very often. And so I had a number of questions, and something may come up as we talk about this trip on the AT is I really don't like snakes.
Oh, good place to go then.
And if you read, talk about Bill Bryson and Walk in the Woods, he's got a great book on Australia, Sunburn, Kendry, and he spends some time talking about all the horrible things that only exist in Australia and are terribly poisonous, and quite funny as he often is.
It's about isn't it eight of the top 10 poisonous spiders, and I think snakes are in Australia, aren't they? And nowhere else.
A bunch of that. It's nowhere else. That's right. So I'm probably a little silly about my fear of snakes, and I had some other questions like water filtration. So there's a great forum on the internet for hiking in Tasmania, Australia, and they refer to it as tramping as opposed to hiking. But anyway, I wanted to get on this forum, kind of like White Blaze, and ask some questions about my upcoming hike and my efforts to try to do the overland track. And when I went to ask questions in the forum, not surprisingly, you have to register. And the first thing they want from you when you register is your trail name. And it was a required entry on the registration. So I quickly figured out, returning to Katahdin is my theme. And, of course, returning to Katahdin is RTK. And so I said, that's good enough. That'll work. So that became my self-prescribed trail name at the time. And
so that is preparation. You've been planning this for 3 or 4 years now, and you actually gave yourself a trail name 3 or 4 years ago. That is preparation for this.
I wasn't really thinking about my AT trail name, but I did this, and then once I had it, and as we'll talk in a minute about the theme of returning to Katahdin, I really like the theme, as hopefully we'll talk about.
Sure.
And so since the name ties directly into the theme, I decided I'm just going to go with that. Partly, too, with the fundraising efforts, I needed some advanced planning to do some promotional materials. I've developed a logo, and having a trail name and that you could turn into a logo, a few months ago, and having that ahead of time actually was helpful for thinking about fundraising and having a trail name that's out there. Like, I don't know if the audience knows, but the ATC did a public announcement back in September about the fundraising efforts, and they referred to me as RTK in that article. So it's there. We're using it. It's kind of stuck. And if someone wants to give me a name along the trail, I certainly will think about it. I'm kind of interested in the history of trail names and whether you're supposed to be given one or whether you can give yourself one.
I think more and more people give themselves one. I think more and more people definitely give themselves one these days.
I've actually interviewed some old, some hikers from the 70s, and it appears that in the old days, the trail pretty much always gave you a name. And I think in modern times, there's more of a mixture, and an awful lot of people do give themselves trail names. And when I look back at some of the memoirs I wrote and some of the, what I would call sort of the superstars or icons of the Appalachian Trail, like, Jennifer Farr Davis or David Miller, they gave themselves their names. So I think it's an acceptable practice, even though some purists would say you really should let the trail.
Well, what I think about purists, don't you? So get over themselves. Okay, right.
So that's kind of where the name comes from. And how both sort of as a practical matter and as a sort of thematic matter. Now, the theme of returning to Katahdin, and once I sort of happened upon it, I have to admit I really liked it because I think I mentioned a little bit, probably you privately, and maybe a little bit on earlier interviews, that I'm from New England. I grew up in Connecticut my whole life. Yeah. And I spent the 70s was my time in high school and college. All of my high school and college years were in the 70s. And that's when I started hiking, backpacking, and canoeing, and that's where I really developed this passion for the outdoors and those activities. And so I was able to hike in Connecticut, Massachusetts, the Adirondacks. I've been in the White Mountains. I've done the Presidential Range. And for 2 summers, I guided canoe trips in the North Maine woods. And that was just one of the opportunities that doesn't come along much in life. It's a couple of the greatest things I've ever been able to do is to spend those whole summers in the North Maine woods and do these trips. Cool. But also, both on days off, it's kind of odd that when you're you have a day off, you decide to go climb a mountain after you've been canoeing for a week or two. So we actually, with the guides, would often get together and we'd go up Katahdin a couple times a year. And sometimes our trail crews would add a side trip up Katahdin. So I've been up Katahdin quite a few times. I've actually done, gotten up at midnight and hiked the trail so we could see the sunrise.
It's going to be very different with 2,000 miles on your feet. I tell you, that's going to be such a day when you go back up there, though. Those ones you've done, those ones you've done were great. I mean, that mountain's still a fantastic mountain to climb by itself, I would think. But at the end of a trip, wow,
fantastic. And one of the stories on my website, one of my very first blog posts about my decision to do the hike, mentions the hike that I was able to do with my former college roommate and his daughter, and me and my daughter, because our daughters were getting ready to be roommates at our alma mater, which was kind of a neat thing. And we brought the girls together for 2 days of river canoeing, lake canoeing, and we all went up Katahdin together. So
cool. Very cool.
It's got a kind of special place in my heart for my passion for the outdoors. And of course, I think you would say, being a thru hiker, that Katahdin has a big place in most thru hikers' hearts because
think about it every single day. There's not a day goes past, not one single day that goes past that I don't think about being on the top. I remember the time I finished. I remember calling my wife, calling my son, being in tears, the whole thing, and then that strange letdown when you come down and it's over. It's I think about it every day. It is what, and it will always be special
to me. And when I kind of came upon this theme, it really kind of resonated with me because while going up Katahdin will not be a new experience for me, it certainly will be sort of symbolic of my return to a passion that I had, because the rest of the story is that I did move from New England to Virginia to go to college, and went to law school at William & Mary. I met my wife there, and I have been in Virginia ever since.
Yeah.
And life sort of happens, and my weekend backpacking turned into day trips, and little by little, I was coaching soccer and playing golf, and I really moved away from these outdoor activities. So the theme partly is I'm returning to this passion that I had for a long time, but a long time ago. I'm returning, in a sense, physically from the south to the north, and I'm returning at a time when it's a great time in life to sort of reflect on life and what have I done well, what have I not done well, what can I do with the years that I have left. And so there is this sort of bit of a theme about going home and reflecting upon life and how things have changed and what I should be doing.
I think that's the thing. We all, at different times of our life, reflect on where we are. And you've had a very successful career in the law. And I know that you're really grateful for your life. And you've told me several times off mic how blessed you are, and I know you are. Talk to that a little and tell us if the passing years led you to this gratitude, or have you always been aware of it?
I wish I could say that I've always been aware of the blessings I've had and be grateful for them. But I do think that life kind of happens. I wasn't handed things on a silver platter, and I feel like I've worked pretty hard for whatever I've done. But a lot of that working hard means sort of nose to the grindstone, and sometimes we don't pick our heads up long enough to reflect and be grateful for what's going on at the time. But I do think when you reach a certain time in life, and I think everybody's different, but this time for me is, I think, a pretty common time for people. When things change, things slow down, your children move along and have their own successful lives, and you have a chance to say, gee, I've been blessed in so many ways. So I guess the answer to your question is that probably have not appreciated all those blessings as soon as I should have, but I'd like to think that I've had an opportunity now, and it's pretty obvious to me how blessed I've been, and therefore how grateful I need to be for all of that. And I will say, I do think time on your feet, long hikes, long walks gives you a chance to reflect, and slowing down and finding opportunities to reflect deeply more than just a few minutes helps you recognize some of those blessings.
I tell you, after 800 miles of reflection, I'd had enough of myself. I had to start listening to music because I couldn't stand the voices that were going on inside my head. So it is a long time to reflect. But, I understand that, the gratitude, and that gratitude kind of informs your desire to give back. And we discussed about the donation to the ATC. I know why the ATC, but is there any specific use you'd like to see the money go to? Or do you have any say in that?
I think I could have had a say in it. I think most charities, not-for-profits, are happy to accept your gifts, and if you want to earmark them, I don't think most of them have a big problem with that.
No.
I feel like I've been on the board of a few. I've been involved in a few charities. I think I understand a little bit about the struggles that not-for-profits have of getting funded properly.
Sure.
And I thought about this issue too, and I said, if you really believe in the mission of an organization, and you really believe in the management and people dedicated to execute on that mission, they know better than I do. And I might have a pet project or two, but I really think that if you are committed to what they're doing and you're confident of the people, and you usually reach that conclusion before you decide to make a gift, then I really felt like I should give them the discretion. And I know from my limited experience on some of these boards, you're grateful to have unrestricted funds. And if you believe in what they're doing, then giving them unrestricted funds means they get to do the things that they think are the highest priority for their mission. Yeah. And I think they're the best ones to know how to do that. So
I totally agree.
I have not made any effort to,
Okay. Now, over the weeks, last couple of weeks, while we've been building up to this and while we've been doing it, we've asked our viewers to write in the questions. And each week we're going to give away a couple of Trailtopia's meals. And the first recipient of that is somebody called Ryan Carr. And Ryan has asked a question. I'll read it out. I'd like to ask how Bruce's previous experience with long-distance hiking will affect his through hike, particularly the cultural differences between the Camino and the AT, and how Bruce expects his experiences to change how he perceives and adapts to the hike compared to someone who starts with no long-distance experience at all. It's quite a good one.
Wow, it's a great question. And Steve, I'm probably going to have to ask you to follow up because there's about 3 or 4 questions in there, which is fine. They're really good questions. I mean, the first way I react to it is I did the Camino because I was attracted to it generally, just the adventure and what I'd read and heard about it. But I'll be honest, I actually had this through hike in mind when I did it. And one of my ideas about preparing for the trail was, if I don't enjoy getting up every day and doing the same thing for 30 days, how am I going to do that for 150 days?
Good thinking.
One thing about the Camino was literally waking up every day, putting a pack on, and walking all day for 30 days. And I felt like, because the Camino is easier physically, because you're carrying less weight, you can always sleep in a bed, you can get out of the rain more easily. I figured that if I didn't enjoy that hiking experience for 30 days in a row, how would I ever enjoy, say, 150 or so days?
Exactly.
So at one level, there was that issue. Now, Ryan mentioned the cultural aspect.
Yes.
That's really, interesting. Obviously, there's some different cultural aspects, but I think there are clearly cultural aspects of both hikes. One thing that we mentioned last week was, I think there's a cultural aspect to the rhythm of the hike, as you said, about the history, the people have come before us on the AT, and moving through different towns that develop their own relationship with the trail. On the Camino, of course, the Camino historically has been a religious pilgrimage, goes back to the medieval times. And so today, there's very much a mixture of people on the Camino. Some people are out there for a solemn religious pilgrimage. Some people out there for some time for self-reflection. Some people out there for an adventure. Just, can I do this? Some people are out there for the challenge of going hiking and walking 500 miles. And so it is very different culturally, but I think the idea that you're going to be walking for a long time every day, I like to call it time on my feet, is one of the things that gives you this opportunity for self-reflection, which I think is so valuable, at all times in our lives, particularly when you're looking back, as I think I'll be doing, about my life and what I've done, what I need to be grateful for, and maybe what can I do better in the future.
The other little bit is, do you think as I understand what he's saying here, do you think that Camino experience in some way is a benefit to you can bring to your AT hike, because you've done that, as you say, getting up every morning walking, as opposed to somebody with no long distance experience, as I was?
Yeah, I think two things about the experience that are beneficial, but I don't want to overemphasize them, because I think the AT is going to be a much more difficult challenge.
Yeah.
One is the mere fact of getting up and walking every day, and walking alone, walking with people, putting in hard days, being bored, not wanting to go another 5 kilometers, but your only choice. Those type of things I think are helpful.
Can I tell you, interrupt you a second, Bruce, because you say
Sure.
about being bored, as soon as you said it, I thought to myself, there was not a single time I was bored on the trail. I was pissed a bit from time to time, and I was upset, and I was happy, I was angry, but I'd never felt bored on the trail. And that's something that, I don't think I've even thought about it before, but as soon as you said the word bored, I just want you to know I never felt bored in 2,200 miles. That's
great. And I hope that's my experience. On the Camino, there's an area called the Meseta. When you leave Burgos, it's kind of Mana La Mancha territory. It's flat wheat fields and the like, and there's 4 or 5 days of walking through the Meseta, which does get very monotonous, and it's become poor agricultural communities. And I have to admit, I got bored a little bit, and I was actually, this kind of ties into the second aspect of benefits from the Camino for the AT. I was a little bit bored, and I actually, I didn't use my iPod and earphones that often. I sort of like just experiencing the outdoors and the people, but occasionally I would turn on some tunes, and some tunes will help with self-reflection too.
Sure.
But related to that was I remember a couple of days where I was between bubbles. Literally, there are bubbles out there on the Camino, like on the AT. I was kind of between bubbles, because you're always walking faster or slower than these bubbles. And combination of being alone for a couple days and fairly dry and uninteresting terrain, I did get a little bored, and I was kind of looking around going, where are these people that I enjoy walking and talking with? So I think, but I want to bring that experience to the AT, which is that I'm going by myself.
Yeah.
But as you know, I won't be alone, and I have to have this conversation with a lot of people who are friends and who ask me about going, and they're very surprised I'm going alone. But as you know, I won't be alone. And then the Camino was very similar. It's so easy to pick up with people on the Camino and walk with them for a day or even a week.
It's the shared goal, isn't it? Don't you think so? That's exactly.
I think so.
Every time.
And so many people, like you've told me, the culture is very similar on the AT, where people pick up and are friends for 2 days, for 2 months, what have you. So I'm looking forward to that, and I think that will actually help me get through, because on balance, I like my time alone, but I think I'm much more social than solitary. And I think my ability and my experience on the Camino with just picking up with people for 3 or 4 days will be beneficial, and hopefully picking up with people on the AT.
Now, last question really is coming back to your name, and I'm not sure really where to go with this, but can you ever really go back home in life? Is it realistic to do that?
Sure. It's certainly that great philosophical question. I think Thomas Wolfe wrote a great book about it, and I think the general thought is, no, you can't ever go home again. It's kind of like philosophically, can you do you ever step in the same river? Because it moves on. It flows,
Absolutely.
Life flows, people change. And so I think there's a danger. Nostalgia is good, but only so far. And if you take it too far, then I think you get great bit of disappointment. If I was going to literally head back to New England and think that things were going to be the way they were 30, 40 years ago, I would be greatly disappointed. So, but I do think that you at least can go back and review, and you can benefit from the contrast between what you do recall and what reality is today.
Yeah.
And I'd like to think, because one of the themes, I think, what you're trying to do with Mighty Blue on the AT, and one of the things that I think is crucial about what I'm doing is I do think you can recall your dreams. I think it's not too late to try to grasp these things, whatever they might be, and complete them whatever time of life it is. And so at some level, this returning to Katahdin and this going back home is both a spiritual and a physical journey.
Yeah.
But I think it's tied to this youthful dream. And I think you need to assess whether the dream is still appropriate at a given point in time. And so far, I've done a fair bit of thinking, because this is kind of silly to head out there and not enjoy it. And I've been very focused on, am I just in love with the idea, the romance of this magnificent adventure, or is this something that I'm really going to enjoy despite the trials and tribulations I'm likely to go through? And so in that sense...
Yeah, I think that's interesting, that. And I'm wondering whether, and I'm sure everybody of our age is nodding at this. They understand the self-reflection of this age. What I'm really fascinated in is whether younger people, even in their 30s, even in their 40s, maybe even in their 50s, younger people, how they relate to that, going back and looking back on their life and so on. So I'm sure, I say, every 60-year-old is nodding. Every 60 and above is nodding. And perhaps one or two of the younger people think, well, I don't think about that sort of stuff. And I'd love to hear from people if they reflect in the same way, because I think that's an important thing for you to be doing. And I'm sitting here interviewing you. Yeah, I'm nodding my head as well at the same time, because I entirely understand what you're saying.
Well, in this day and age, I think you have to be more and more intentional about being self-reflective, because we are offered so many things to do every day that now kind of comically talk about multitasking all the time. And there is such an offer in the internet and elsewhere of activities to do. If you fill up your day throughout life with all of these things, you do fail to leave time for some of that self-reflection. And I think if you don't slow down from time to time, we miss the opportunity to reassess, reprioritize. Absolutely. And I'd like to think that I'm grateful that I've done a little of that recently, but I think I would have benefited even more so if I could have slowed down and done it more in my 30s and 40s.
Awesome. That is great. That's a lovely answer, and I'm glad I asked the question. Now, I wasn't sure about where we'd go with it, but that is interesting. Now, as you
sure either.
as you reflected, you've done a lot of planning for this last 4 years, and next week is going to be all about planning. So it's been good talking to you again, Bruce, and we'll catch up again next week. And thanks to Ryan for that question, by the way. Appreciate it, and we'll get on to you and make sure we get Trailtopia to send out your 2 film mirrors. Okay, Bruce, I'll speak to you soon, okay?
All right, very good. Thanks again.
All the best.
Touch.
Bye.
Cheers.
We got a bit philosophical near the end there. It's funny. Walking all day in the quiet of the woods with nothing to distract you can make you very reflective. Having time to think with no Facebook or even podcasts to fill your mind allows a level of self-reflection. And everybody I've met really appreciates that. As you can hear, Bruce has really thought this through, even to the extent of having a trail name for such a long time. He knows he'll be having time to think on the trail, and he seems ready for it. Thanks to Ryan Carr for his great question. Please email me your address, Ryan, and I'll get those Trailtopia meals right out to you. If you have any allergy issues, let me know. We had a bunch of questions, all of which I'm going to keep in a file, and every week choose one that I want to ask Bruce. So if you didn't win this week, keep listening, as your question may be next week. And if you haven't sent in a question yet, please make sure that you do to steve@mightyblueontheat.com. That's steve@mightyblueontheat.com. And you could be winning next week. If you wanted to find out more about Bruce's hike, have a look at his site, returningtokatahdin.com. Also, don't forget to check out the Trailtopia site at trailtopia.com. I hope we'll see you back here next week when Bruce tells us all about his preparation for the journey. Bruce and I will see you next week.